Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to decorate this stunning tray bake, and the great thing is you only need one piping tube and some piping bags. I'll teach you how to pipe these gorgeous roses, a selection of flowers, some leaves, and right at the end I'm going to show you how to pipe a message so that you can personalise your own tray bake. My name's Lynn and let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is cover the entire tray bake in a layer of frosting. I've coloured it a really soft, pretty green. There we go. So that's all covered now. I want to personalise this tray bake with a message, and so I just want one bit in the middle that I'm going to leave without piped flowers on. And to make that smooth, I've actually just cut up, I've made my own scraper. I mean, you can use a scraper if you've really got one, but I've just made this from a takeaway pot. And I am just going to scrape over the middle a few times, backwards and forwards. There we go. And now, so that I know that I have to leave a gap in the middle to pipe around, I'm just going to emboss this little dish like that in the middle, and so that I know I can pipe all my roses and leaves and pretty flowers around the sides. So this is where the fun really starts, and I'm going to show you how to pipe these beautiful flowers using my favourite piping tube. And I always start with the largest flower on my cake, which is these stunning deep, I suppose they're a peachy colour, rose swirl. And let's bring in the piping tube. It's called a 2D. I really do think this is kind of, if you had to choose a nozzle, this is the must-have in your cupboard. I also want to show you something else. If I turn the bag like that, you can see that my frosting in there, it's a buttercream frosting, and I will put the recipe in the description below the video. It's slightly mottled and marbled, and that's because when I was colouring it, I didn't mix it in so it was completely even. So I'm just going to twist the bag really tightly, and I'll show you on the board first before we move on to the cake. So hold the piping tube directly above where you're going to pipe. Make sure it's nice and tight, and then apply pressure to pipe a star, and then you're just going to swirl it around the star and down onto your cake or board. So next we're going to move on to the cake. I've got a damp piece of kitchen roll here, and always make sure your piping tube is nice and clean before you start piping. And avoiding the circle in the middle where my message is going to be, I'm going to randomly pipe beautiful rose swirls over the cake. There we go. And just one last thing to do. I'm just going to take my brush and just neaten up where I finished the piping. I think they all look good. Now I'm going to move on to the pink frilly one, and this is a good opportunity to show you how, or the easiest way to fill a piping bag, with a little tip of how to add extra colour into it. So I've got a disposable bag, and I always pop my tube in first and push it down to the bottom, then move it up just a little bit and snip off the tip. This is so that you don't cut too much off. And then now I am going to paint some extra colouring inside the bag. And this is some paste food colouring or gel food colouring that I've added a bit of water to. And I'm going to go right into the bottom of the tube and just paint some lines up the bag. And now I'll bring in my buttercream. I've got some pink buttercream and natural buttercream. I'm just going to give it a quick mix and pop it into my bag. So fold your bag down. And put the buttercream in. So there we go, just push the buttercream down, twist tightly. I'll bring in the board to practice on, And again, pipe straight down, but this time we're going to move or wiggle my hand from left to right. So start applying pressure, and then I'm just going to go backwards and forwards. Do another one, backwards and forwards, and stop the pressure and come away. And I'm going to start to fill all the gaps in around the roses, quite randomly. Now moving on to these pretty blue blossoms, as always, you always start with your piping bag straight up. I'm going to touch down and then stay down and twist your piping tube. It's actually easier to do it a bit faster. There we go. So let's go on to the cake. And sometimes the smaller your flowers get, it's quite nice to bunch them together. You can see now that's really starting to look great. Now we're going to move on to these small white and yellow flowers that I kind of think they resemble daisies. This time I'm going to use a slightly different technique because I'm not going to twist the piping tube at all. So we just touch down, apply pressure and come away. And then I'm just going to move round a tiny bit and do the same. So it resembles a daisy. Later on, I'm going to put a little centre inside. So I'll do one more. Touch down, stop piping or stop the pressure and come away. And then you're kind of piping in between the petals. And I think I'll make that my last one. And the only flower we've got left now is the small yellow daisy. So now I'm moving on to the last and the smallest flower. And I've coloured some buttercream yellow. And just like I did before, to add kind of a two-tone to the flower, I've painted with some food colouring a line up the inside of the bag. For this one, it's just a smaller version of this daisy and exactly the same method in that you touch down, press and come away, and that's it. I don't go in for a second time. Touch down, press and pull away. And now I'm really going to look at filling all of the gaps. I've kept my natural coloured buttercream one here just in case I want to add a few more in. And if you apply less pressure, you can make them smaller. And there I think I've finished with the flowers. Now, you'll see there's a few gaps between the flowers, but don't worry about that because we're going to go on to piping some leaves. I've got a really handy tip for you now. I did promise that you won't need any more piping tubes, and you won't, but I do want to show you what a leaf tube looks like. And then we're going to cut this into the piping bag. So I'm just going to go right down to the bottom of the piping bag and cut a little triangle in. It's quite hard for you to see, I know, but now that looks really like the piping tube. The next thing I'm going to do is add some colour. And that's where we've cut the little snip. Now I'm going to turn it on its side so we've got the join of the bag at the bottom and the top. I've got some green paste food colouring here. I've added a little bit of water to it and I'm just going all the way along one of the joins of the piping bag. Pop that to one side and now fill my piping bag with some green frosting. There we have it. And look, if I show you this now, you can see I've got the line of green. It doesn't matter that it's spread out a bit, that will look quite nice. To pipe the leaves, you want to turn it, the piping bag, so that you've got the green on the top. I always do a tester one first because you're going to have a little bit of food colouring that comes out. And then you add pressure and just come away from the flower. The more pressure you add, the larger your leaf will be. And you can also make tiny weeny leaves by just adding a tiny bit of pressure, and then stop the pressure as you come away. Let's move on to the cake. Perfect. And so now I'm going to add a few little sprinkles into the centre of the flowers. I've got some different size pearls and some orange little tiny circle sprinkles, and I am going to use some tweezers because they're very fiddly. And I think just to finish it off, I think it will look quite nice if I just literally drop a few sprinkles in around it. You can see how fiddly they are. There we go. There's just one very last thing to do, and that's to pipe a personalised message in the middle. It's really understandable being a little bit nervous when it comes to piping lettering on a cake, so I've got a few tips. The first one is I've taken my buttercream and I've added a few drops of water, and I want a fluid consistency instead of the firm consistency of when I was piping the flowers. It will work a lot better. Secondly, you need to get rid of any air bubbles, and to do this, just take your buttercream and squash the air bubbles out on your worktop. And the third tip is, if you haven't got a piping tube like this, I did say we weren't going to use lots of pieces of equipment, you can cut a tiny hole in the bottom of a disposable piping bag. Now you can see here I've got a greaseproof bag, and there's a reason for that. If you use plastic disposable bags, they often have a seam down the side which makes it a bit awkward. So I'm just lifting my frosting up, putting it into my greaseproof bag. If you don't know how to make a greaseproof bag, go to the description and there's a link to another short video. And I'm just folding the bag down and pushing the icing to the bottom of the bag. The third tip is to practice, practice, practice. And that will give you the confidence to work on your cake. I'm going to cut a tiny hole in the bottom of my bag. I'm going to add pressure onto the bag gently with my thumb and start piping. Can you see I'm lifting the icing up and then I'm coming down again? Then I'm coming over here for the next line, which is birthday. And breathe. It is funny. You always end up holding your breath when you're writing. So now let's move on to the cake. And the first thing I'm going to do, this might sound a little bit silly, but I like to pretend to write it so I know that I'm writing in the middle of the space. So I'm just going to make sure that all my lettering fits in the space. If it didn't, you need to go a little bit smaller. Let's start. and breathe again. There we go. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed doing it. Mine's very colourful. Of course, you can choose your own colours and go very subtle. All the products I used, including this wonderful tin, I did treat myself to a new tin. I know I'll use this over and over again, are in the description below. Thank you for watching.